Good evening, welcome to another hot topic where we discuss the issues of the day affecting the people of East Yorkshire and Northern Lincolnshire. Dementia affects over 800,000 people in the UK, with numbers set to rise to over 1 million by 2021. There are approximately 670,000 carers in the UK looking after their relatives. This is expected to rise to 1.7 million by 2050. Dementia costs the UK economy over £24 billion a year. The disease is one of the main causes of disability in later life, ahead of cancer. Yet as a country, we spend much less on dementia than cancer and other conditions. Is there enough support for those suffering with the condition and for their carers? What more can be done to invest in the treatment and awareness of dementia? I'll be discussing this with my guests tonight, Ian Weatherhead, who has nearly 40 years' experience in nursing and works for Dementia UK, now leading on developing services in workplaces and local communities. Ian is also an Admiral nurse and went on to lead Dementia UK's Helpline Admiral Nursing Direct from 2009 until 2015. I'm also joined by Emily, I beg your pardon, I'm going to check how to pronounce your name, Emily. Emily Rezai, who is the Alzheimer's Society's Services Manager for North and North East Lincolnshire. Emily set up the Dementia Action Alliance for North East Lincolnshire in 2013, aiming to ensure that the country or that the county becomes a dementia-friendly community. Welcome to Hot Topic, I'm Hugh Riches. Before we start, a family in East Yorkshire is calling for the government to change the law surrounding Alzheimer's care provision. Currently, the local council will take a person's savings to help pay for their residential care if the family can't pay for it themselves. Bernard and Beryl Nuttall have been married for 50 years this April. Beryl was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 5 years ago and is currently living at the Overton House residential care home in Cottingham. Bernard tells us how the news of his wife's condition changed his life forever.
Well, it changes your life, doesn't it? I mean, you know, we used to go away on holiday every month or so, and of course all that just stops dead, and you just carry on as you best can, basically.
You know, some people at a certain age it gets on the nerves, doesn't it? And it does mine.
Yeah, it does. And of course your life changes because you know, I come and visit every day and I come every afternoon. It hurts when you've saved all your life and they actually take your savings away from you, you know what I mean? Whereas you save for your children and you think, when we're out of here, the children will get it, at least. But now, of course, they won't, because the council have took it for home care. It's not the council's fault, it's the law, isn't it? You know what I mean? It wants changing. And I'd do anything to change it. Pardon?
Them one there.
Yeah, you know who those are, don't you? You know that is on the top corner, Dale Lambert, the ice hockey player. You used to love him, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, used to love him. And who else is on there? That's us in the corner, look, when we got married. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Yeah, and your sisters, and your cousins, and your best friends.
Oh, I'm going to get rid of them.
Ian, Emily, both of you, welcome. Thanks very much for coming. What are the rules, Ian? Who pays?
It's quite a complex system, really, in who actually pays for care. The basic thresholds are, if you've got more than roughly £24,000, you're classed as self-funding. So you've got to pay for any care for yourself, whatever that is, out of your own finances. If you have between £24,000 and roughly £14,000, it tends to go on a sliding scale. So as your own savings go down, then the state social care would start introducing payments to help balance that out. Below £14,000, usually the state would pay for the full funding for care.
And when you say if you have more than £24,000, that means your whole family, does it? I mean, are your children obliged? Is their money taken into the calculation, Emily?
For example, when people have a mortgage or a house that's freehold, they would have to use that as the method of payment for their care. So it could be that they'll be asked to sell their house to be able to pay for care, because obviously it's classed as a collateral. It's funding, it's money there. Whether that's fair or not, I wouldn't like to comment, but that's what people are expected to do. So that's technically your child's inheritance, and that's what the local authority would expect.
Well, I guess, is that fair enough then? Because if you've got that money, and no child is entitled, has a right to whatever, any parent can leave their money to the cat's home if necessary, if that's their money to pay for their own upkeep. Doesn't that seem fair enough?
It's always a contentious one for people, really, on what is right and what is not regarding this. And there are different views about whether we should pay for our own care if we have the means to do so. And a lot of people would argue that, yes, as we should. It's no right to hand that on to anybody else for future generations of families. But if we've contributed into state benefits, pensions, national insurance contributions all our life, others would argue that, well, should we not be getting that care free at that point?
Talk about that obligation in a moment. But just to clarify, if my dear old grandmother, neither of whom one of whom was killed by the Luftwaffe, which simplified that very easily. But if they were diagnosed with, say, a form of dementia, she didn't have any money, but I was a millionaire, would I be obliged to pay for her upkeep?
You as an individual, no, because it's what your relative has. So even if it's husband and wife that's alive, it would be what money they have would be split 50-50, in effect, to calculate what an individual's finances are rather than the couple as a whole. So it wouldn't be your obligation to fund then for a relative's care. It would be down to what that individual's circumstances are.
Just one more question on these technicalities. I'm diagnosed with dementia. I've got more than £24,000, but I'm no longer in a position to be responsible to sign a cheque. I mean, the fact that I've got dementia and need to spend this money, by definition, means that I'm not necessarily capable of having authority over that money. What's the position, Emily?
I mean, that comes down to mental capacity. So then it very much depends whether somebody has a family member and whether power of attorney is in place. So one of the things that we advocate for as an organisation is when somebody is diagnosed with dementia, that you plan as early as you possibly can. So power of attorney would give family members of your choosing, when you do have capacity, the ability to make those decisions on your behalf, to sign cheques on your behalf, but that has to be registered. If you're on your own, then that becomes very, very difficult, because if you haven't got the capacity to make the decisions in your own best interests, then we generally have to go to the Court of Protection. That's a much longer process. That's something that obviously social services and the local authority would have to do in order to obtain that money from you.
The Court of Protection, I mean, that's straight out of Dickens, isn't it? I mean, that's something out of Bleak House, isn't it? And that's,
it's a very frightening thing for a lot of people to hear about, and it's very sterile and very clinical. But these are the methods and the processes they have in place in order to make sure it's fair and consistent where it can be.
You raised the point, Ian, that if we've been paying all our lives for the taxation of national insurance for a national health service, which is costing, 16% of GDP, something like that. It's pretty much the most expensive thing that the state does, and the most expensive charge that the state makes on us. We've already bought that care, haven't we?
And that's an argument that many people will say, that I've already paid into the system. Why should I then have to pay further for any further care as a result of that? What am I getting back out of it? Where have my contributions gone over the years? And there is no easy answer to that. As I say, there's many different arguments. Personally, I feel we should have a right to free personal care above and beyond. I think that's something that I've paid into all my life, and I feel that we should be entitled to. My family's gone through dementia. My mother's just recently passed away in a care home. All her savings were used to pay for that care. No, we as a family don't expect anything as a right, as family members. But is it right that they should have to use all their finances to pay for care?
Emily, I said in that introduction, we spend far more on cancer treatment than we do on dementia treatment. If somebody's diagnosed with cancer, the NHS automatically looks after them. Why not dementia?
I think as a society, we're still way, way behind. With regards to dementia, there's still a lot of public perception and misconceptions around dementia, what it is, what it isn't. In terms of getting a diagnosis, that can be so difficult. We have the Right to Know campaign, which campaigns for everyone to have the right to a dementia diagnosis. It's not just a normal part of getting old. So we need to make sure that we're educating not only the community, but also practitioners around diagnosing.
Well, we'll talk about that awareness in a moment. Just must go for a break here. Please join me after the break. We'll continue discussing dementia.
I want to see Grimsby put on the map. extraordinary qualities, unmatched in anywhere else in Britain.
We need to act with one voice.
I was absolutely shocked, I'll tell you the truth.
More police officer hours spent on patrol preventing crimes from happening.
Welcome back. I'm still with Ian Weatherhead of Dementia UK and Emily Rezai of the Alzheimer's Society. Emily, you were just saying that maybe we should prepare for dementia and be more aware of it sooner than so many of us are.
Yeah, we definitely should be reporting any memory problems to our GP as soon as we possibly can, because that gives the family members, the person living with dementia, the most possible time to plan to live well. We talk a lot about dementia, but we don't talk always about the positive things. And what we campaign for as an organisation is for people to live well. So by prior planning, you can live well with dementia. You can do the things that you've always done, maybe with a bit more support. But it's about having a more positive representation of dementia as opposed to perpetuating the negativity that's always in the media.
Well, we'll try to break apart that phrase, live well, in a moment. But Ian, the financial preparation, I guess, is what you have to worry about most. I mean, it's the financial side of it that one can expect a community or a state to be more involved in.
It is, and it's always a concern for families when it does come down to finances, to who's going to pay for care. Will they fall within social care, or will it come under the health services? And most often than not, it will come under the social care for funding and for placements into appropriate care facilities, or if they are providing home care for somebody. So if somebody has difficulties but not needing to go into residential or placement care, then it's who's going to provide the services for somebody to come into my house to look after me if I'm needing help, and if my family are needing help to support me. And it's understanding the system on what is out there. If you are self-funding, it's about looking at what's the best that there is for me. I can pick and choose what kind of care that I want. And yes, in that sense, if you're paying for your own care, maybe you do have more flexibility, because you can buy what services you want. If you're state funded, if it comes under social care, then that's much more limited in effect as to what your choices are within that care.
Well, of course, none of us can know whether or not we're going to suffer from this. And it seems that the responsibility should be taken by the sufferer, if that's the right word, the patient. But of course, you have to take that responsibility before you suffer the condition, if you're going to spare your family as much as possible. And 10% of, 3% of people under 65 get this condition, 19% under 75, and half of us, by the time we're 85, are going to be, is it rude of me to use the word gaga? It just seems, it is, yes,
yeah.
you're nodding, okay.
It is.
That's
kind
going
of the
to
image
suffer
we
some
try
sort of
to...
mental debility anyway, by the time we're 85. So we should all just assume that we are going to suffer this problem.
No, I don't think we should all assume. I think we can say with some level of certainty that 1 in 14 of us will be affected by dementia at some point, whether that means...
1 in 14 of us?
1 in 14.
Oh, okay.
So whether that means we're caring for somebody with dementia or whether we have it ourselves, we'll all have been touched by dementia. Ian's been touched by dementia, I've been touched by dementia. So that's 2 of us in this room to start with. So we can't assume that we're going to get it. We do know that age is a significant risk factor, but it's not the only risk factor. And there's lots of people over 85 that don't have dementia. So
well, half of them. Yeah.
Well, yeah, half of them do, half of them don't. So, there's lots to say that we won't necessarily get it. But
could we turn, just stay with the money for a little longer, turn to the private sector for this? Can one insure against getting dementia? Or it would be assurance rather than insurance, I suppose, wouldn't it? But are those policies available?
You can't insure against getting dementia because we don't know who will and who won't get dementia.
Well, that's the whole point of insurance.
We know
you
the
don't know if it's going to
statistics
happen.
out there, but some companies will pay for that. They will cover it as a long-term disability and condition. We never know how long dementia is going to last for any individual. It is different for every single person as to how long somebody may live with dementia. And it's about that quality of life from point of diagnosis through to the end of life. It's how we manage that effectively, whether that's from the private sector paying for care support, for home care support, or for residential nursing care support, or whether that's from the state and social care that pays for that, or us as individuals. We as I say, we get so many questions, how long is this going to go on for? And that's when it becomes difficult with funding, because how long is a piece of string when we have a limited amount of funds within our own network, within our own families and within our own bank accounts? When that money runs out, and I've been living in lovely care facilities, what happens when my money runs out? Will the state pick up those finances or not? Will I have to be moved? And we hear so many people that do get moved from home to home because some homes then suddenly aren't able to cope with somebody's needs, or the benefits are different, the costings are different.
We've talked about dementia as if it was one thing, as a sort of a subhead that covers all sorts of conditions, Emily, but it's not one condition. There are all sorts of different causes, and presumably, according to the different causes, different consequences, different forms that the condition takes.
Yeah, there's different types of dementia. So if you think of dementia as an umbrella term, there's all different types underneath it. So Alzheimer's being one type and the most common, followed by vascular dementia, which is linked to bleeds in the brain, followed by mixed dementia, which is a combination of Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. And yes, they do have hallmarks. Each type has a hallmark. So for Alzheimer's, you've got your 3 distinct stages, from early, moderate to end of life. For vascular dementia, you're very much susceptible to the bleeds in the brain. So you don't know when you're going to have one of those, and we don't know exactly which part of the brain a bleed will happen in. So you're not able to know what part of your functioning will be affected. So it's much more of a stepped progression. So sort of a plateau, followed by a dip where the bleed in the brain is, followed by another plateau. So that can be quite difficult to plan for, because we never know what part of the brain will be affected. So it could be speech and language, it could be more mechanical, so motor function. And that can be quite difficult.
Well, as you say, half of the cases are Alzheimer's, which is a particular sort of deterioration of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
But for instance, that vascular dementia, I mean, that sounds quite mechanical. And can a surgeon not just go in there and repair the pipework and put Humpty Dumpty back together again?
No, because when we have a bleed in the brain, it causes what we call an infarct, which effectively kills the brain tissue. So we're not able to repair that, unfortunately. However, it is one of the types of dementia that we can influence the most, because it's associated with lifestyle choices. So all the stuff that we hear about smoking, less smoking, less drinking, low cholesterol. I know you're rolling your eyes, all the boring things that we're always told. But that's one of the types of dementia that we can educate about more so, because we can actually impact it with more sensible life choices.
Okay, all right. So it's really all the advice that doctors give you about every condition you could possibly have anyway.
Yes.
is more exercise, eat healthily, stop smoking, drink less.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We call it dementia, we associate it with older people, and my statistics only go from people who are from 65 and onwards, and I don't call that particularly old. But why is it just statistically necessary that the longer you live, the chances are the greater that you're going to suffer any condition, dementia being one of them, or is it just something about having an aging brain?
We do know that age is the highest risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease, so that we are now living longer as a nation, as a race globally. Therefore, we're seeing the numbers rise, because one of the consequences of that is the increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. But it's not a normal part of aging, and I think people need to be aware that changes that they are seeing isn't just part of getting old. And when we hear people saying that, oh, the GP has told me that, it's really quite infuriating to hear that said, that somebody's just been told that kind of information, because it's not normal to start losing one's memory, to start such changes that we do see when somebody does deteriorate with a dementia, whatever specific type it is. But we are starting to see more younger people with dementia. And I think that's partly through improved diagnosis, that we are now starting to recognise that younger people are developing dementia. For many, many people are being misdiagnosed with depression, especially for under 65s and under 50s. It's not the first thing that a GP or somebody might consider looking for if somebody's presenting with memory problems, with withdrawing, with various other symptoms, because depression itself can mirror a lot of the symptoms of dementia. And so we have improved in our diagnosis processes these days.
I'm not trying to look for silver linings here, but in a way then, isn't that the increase in diagnosis, isn't that a good news, A, because it means that the diagnostics are better, but B, because it just proves that we're living longer, that we're living long enough to suffer this condition. The fact that dementia numbers are going up so quickly in the third world, perhaps, is a sort of a positive economic indicator. Oh, you're looking very sceptical about that, Emily.
Double-edged
Well,
sword.
it's double-edged. I'm sure if you spoke to somebody with dementia, they would have a very different.
Well, the reason that the numbers of dementia are going up is because people are living long enough to get dementia, and presumably well, we'll come on to this judgment, but presumably having dementia is better than being dead, and than dying too young to get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, like Ian said, it's a double-edged sword. I think, you know, it's about quality of life. So we speak to lots of people with dementia that just want a good quality of life, want to live well, want to be respected, want to have dignity, and want to be part of their communities. So if they had all of those things, then I'm sure, yes, they'd think having dementia is better than being dead.
Okay. I'm not suggesting it as an option, or and certainly not as an economic measure that the NHS might consider. But it's just that there is, it strikes me that presumably we must make the assumption that living is better than not living, but also accept the fact that we're going to die. I mean, it's pointless to deny mortality.
And it's a case of, as well, how do we know how that person is feeling? We tend to assume a lot automatically that because somebody's got dementia, they don't know anything about what's going on in their life, in the world around them, within family, who people are. What we don't know is how that person is feeling internally.
Well, we'll get on to that matter of quality of life in a moment. We must go for a break there. Please come back in a couple of minutes. We'll continue talking about dementia then. Welcome back. I'm still with Emily Rezai and Ian Weatherhead discussing dementia. Before we go on, let's just have a little look at this film about some of the ways the condition might be treated.
Food, glorious food. Who doesn't appreciate it? Well, now, it's not just being used to line your stomachs, but also to bring back memories of bygone days, to help sufferers of dementia. Marco Humphrey is from Magnavita.
Okay, well, this is the Dementia Cafe here at Slough Trinity Centre, and I'm here to do a concept called Feeding Memories. And that really is an idea around using food as a nostalgic way of drawing out feel-good memories. So the idea is somebody who's maybe suffering from dementia, either early stage dementia or quite advanced, they might see an image, smell a food product, taste something, get some kind of stimulation to draw out a feel-good memory, and that's what we're looking for, that sort of that well-being, so that when they go back home or wherever they live, they say, I've had a really good day today.
Marco's background was in food before he discovered the benefits it could have in other areas away from nutrition. He now delivers the sessions himself and sees it making a real difference.
Food can be used in different ways. It's not always about the nutrition of food. And I started doing a bit of research around smelling foods, tasting, the whole area of old food adverts, and I found that there was some evidence that the exposure to these kind of things of food from the past does draw out well-being feelings, and it also enabled people who may be struggling to eat because they're getting forgetful about eating or they're becoming paranoid about eating food. It seems to help them in that area. So not only was it bringing out well-being feelings, but people in care homes were saying when people have more exposure to food reminiscence, they seem to have an overall better food intake, so they're better nourished as well.
One set of solutions there that might make the condition more comfortable. Is that the sort of thing that you'd recommend, that that people suffering from dementia can feel more comfortable, more happy if they're... Well, we'd all like to be reminded of our glory days, but if they can be taken back to times where they were more competent.
I think we need to be careful that we should not assume that somebody is suffering with dementia. I think it's an important term that we tend to use quite glibly at times. We should not assume that anybody is suffering with dementia, and a lot of people with dementia would argue very strongly, saying that they are not suffering. They are living with the condition, and many are living very well with the condition. But yes, to look at the nostalgic side of things, long-term memory remains intact much better than short-term. Short-term memory is always the first part to go for somebody with dementia, whereas a lot of the long-term memory remains much more intact, and the Alzheimer's has a very good bookshelf analogy on how memories are stored, which is just a wonderful way of describing that kind of scenario and system. So when we look back at at things that are from our childhood, we may have a greater connection and recognition with those things than what we may see in what we're doing at this moment today, because we're unable to retain today's memories as well as that's already in the library of our memories.
So, I mean, that's it. I mean, I think we can all remember school lunches, but we can't necessarily remember what we had for lunch last Tuesday, and that's not just a condition of dementia. That's the sort of a natural state of the human brain, isn't it?
Yeah. But what we're looking at with dementia is it's isolated to short-term memory, so we're forgetting a lot very frequently. So reminiscence can really provide a source of comfort, and also conversation. It's really, really important for people with dementia to maintain their skills. So if we're able to engage in reminiscence with them, should they want to, or go through some of their life history, then that enables them to take part in a meaningful conversation, which therefore means they're using all the parts of their brain to have a conversation and to engage in social interaction, which is so, so important. So actually, it has massive and massive benefits.
Well, that's, I mean, the cruelest thing is to lose capacity for language, I suppose, because without language there's no communication, and thus there's isolation and loneliness, and the concepts might be moving in the mind perfectly fluidly, but with no words to articulate them. That's a dreadful fate.
It is, but then that's for us as practitioners and providers to try and find ways to communicate. So if the spoken word isn't available, is the written word available? Are we using pictures? Are we using different methods and forms of communication? Could it be music? Certain songs that might evoke a happy memory that we know of. And that's why taking a good solid life history is so important. So it comes back down to that preparation, that planning and understanding the person, because the dementia is different for every person. So we can't assume that we know exactly how that person is feeling.
Well, that gets back to your point, Ian, that you're quite right. I mean, we mustn't assume that it's suffering because, ignorance is bliss, as it were. If you're not aware that you're suffering a condition and your perception of yourself and the world is a perfectly comfortable and cheerful and happy one, maybe it's a resolution much to be desired.
But I think early in the condition as well, people are aware of what's going on. And again, it's that assumption that once that happens, that people are not aware of what's happening. It tends to be much later on in the condition that maybe that external awareness and those abilities to communicate do cause a lot of problems. And the communication in particular with speech, with the loss of speech and the difficulty with word finding or understanding what's being said to somebody. We tend to see a lot more problems and difficulties around behaviour with communication, because if you're in pain, how are you going to tell me you're in pain if you've lost that ability to tell me?
Well, I want to sort of move on there to this idea of competence. Forgive me, Plato always has an answer here. He describes those getting old and not, he wouldn't have used the word dementia because he spoke Greek rather than Latin, but he said there's not much acumen of the mind that once carried them in their youth. Those characteristics one would call judgment, imagination, power of reasoning and memory. They seem gradually blunted by deterioration and can hardly fulfill their function. Now, I quote that partly because that English translation is beautiful, but partly because there is a lack of competence, and we don't allow, for instance, children to drive cars or vote because they don't have the mental capacity to do so. If that right to vote, say, especially that political right that affects other people, is dependent on the capacity of the mind, of an adult mind, where does that leave those suffering from dementia?
Well, I think for the phrase, it's beautiful the way it's phrased, but it's actually the one thing that we try to avoid, that type of perception of dementia.
You arguing with Plato?
I'm arguing with Plato.
Okay.
So we try to avoid that perception of the fact that because somebody has a diagnosis of dementia, that all of a sudden they're incompetent. They've got life skills that they can still very much use. We support people who still do drive. They've had to make certain adaptations, so maybe get a car with a satellite navigation system so they can reroute themselves, because we know that sudden unplanned changes in route can be very, very problematic for somebody with dementia who has a problem with orientation. But it would be remiss of us and frankly awful to assume that because somebody has the word dementia in their diagnosis that they don't have a wealth of experience and skills. The right to vote should still be in place, providing they can make that decision for themselves and not being coerced in any way. And that's where it comes back down to capacity, having a proper mental capacity assessment, and making sure that we as a community and as a nation support those people living with dementia to partake in community life. We know that over a third of people with dementia feel isolated from their communities, which is why we're campaigning for more dementia-friendly communities. And I think as a county, as a region, as a country, we all have a responsibility and a part to play in supporting people with dementia.
Well, what you say about keeping that mind active is forgive me here for being very classical, but that's exactly what Cicero said as well. And I only mention that because it seems appropriate in this conversation to be quoting the ancients. But that if you keep that mind active and keep going, that's the way to retain the joy and the pleasure of life. Is that the case here?
It can do. It is vitally important that we do encourage people to maintain as much independence and normality as possible for as long as possible for their well-being and for living well with dementia. Whether that's reading, whether that's gardening, whether that's walking, communications, doing puzzles. If it's things that they've always done, it's easy to maintain those, and it's encouraging people to carry on and maintaining doing those.
I'm sorry to get back to this point about the vote, but we don't let children vote because they don't have the mental capacity to make that decision. You say, Emily, that the people should vote as long as the other people aren't making that decision for them. But in that case, we would let children vote, because children under 18 and children under 12 can, at least pick a colour and make that decision for themselves. So this isn't an argument or a suggestion that people with dementia shouldn't be voting. It may well be that only people who have a certain mental capacity should be voting. But how do you answer that point? Because that raises a sort of I know it sounds like a moral philosophy tutorial, but it raises a big point, doesn't it?
It does raise a point, but I think with the very token of the phrase, we can't liken people with dementia who may be 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 to children, because children may only have 8 years of experience or 12 and they don't necessarily understand politics and what that means. But somebody with dementia, although they might have memory problems, if they still have capacity or are still able to understand what voting means with support from practitioners or family members, shouldn't have that right taken away from them.
But no, I'm not arguing about that. I'm not suggesting that rights should be taken away from anybody.
No, it shouldn't be taken away.
But you're suggesting, you're putting very much on the dementia as a loss of memory there, as rather than a loss of reasoning capacity.
No, it doesn't. You do lose reasoning, but then again, it's to making sure that they've got that capacity to make the decision. So that's to make sure that they've had a mental capacity assessment or that they're being supported appropriately. So they can lose and do lose logic and reasoning, but that's not to say that they can't be supported to do things that still need logic and reasoning.
And I guess these things are all on a continuum rather than an absolute cut-off point of one stop or another.
Yeah, there are lucid moments even in those later stages. There can be lucid, clear moments, but they may be few and far between.
Let's talk about how to enjoy those in a minute. We'll just have to have another break there. Join me in a couple of minutes further, more on dementia. Welcome back. I'm still with Ian Weatherhead of Dementia UK and Emily Rezai of the Alzheimer's Society. Emily, I know you've recently been doing some work on dementia care in this region, in North East Lincolnshire.
Yeah, we've actually done it nationally. There's been a national report, the Fixed Dementia Care campaign that the Society launched on the 18th of January. And basically a really big piece of research into the standard of care that people with dementia receive in hospitals. So some of the findings were actually quite shocking in the lack of parity across the NHS in the acute trusts. So it's very much a postcode lottery. If you're in a good hospital that has good levels of dementia knowledge, you get good dementia care. If you're not, then you don't. And 570 people with dementia were asked about their experiences of dementia care in hospital, and 92% said they found hospitals to be frightening places.
Whereabouts is this?
That was across the country.
Across the whole country, okay.
Yeah, and that 2% of people with dementia, only 2 thought that actual NHS staff, so hospital staff, understood their condition and their specific needs. So we know that people with dementia don't get the level of care that people without dementia get. They're often discharged in the early hours of the morning. The readmission rate is very, very high because sometimes their clinical need is dealt with, but then they're discharged in the early hours, they're disorientated, they can't get access to services in the middle of the night. So we really have to do a lot of work with educating our acute trusts, and there is a call that all hospital trusts should provide an annual dementia statement, including feedback from people with dementia and their carers about the care they've received, and also that the regulators, so Monitor and the Care Quality Commission, should also include dementia standards in their assessments. And that way it would be a much more transparent process, much like it is with care homes, that we can see actually which hospitals are performing the best, where they aren't, where the issues are, and then that allows us to help and support from a Dementia UK Alzheimer's perspective.
Ian, the fact that people are thinking that the people who are caring for them, looking after them, the professionals in hospitals, that they feel they don't know enough about the condition, and that people are being put back on a bus at 4 o'clock in the morning. Why? How is the situation?
It's a huge problem, and although it came out within the dementia strategy some years ago, back in 2009, that improved awareness and education for healthcare staff, both in the care homes and in the hospital settings, was required to help address this problem. It's very, very piecemeal on where it's happening and where it's not. It's not a priority for the NHS to train their staff within acute hospitals. It's not mandatory training that all their staff...
What do you mean by acute hospitals and acute trusts? So some people might not be aware of
general
that.
hospitals,
Okay.
General hospital settings. If somebody's going in for an acute infection or for an operation, or they've had a fall, it's how that person is then treated when they are in hospital. So often we actually hear that people are being escorted and watched over by security guards. Since when did our healthcare system be managed by security guards? When somebody's going in for care, what's gone wrong? What's happened to the system? I mean, I've been in this industry for nearly 40 years now, and in some ways we've gone backwards to where we were 40 years ago on some of our care. We talk about personhood and the individual and what's good care, and my name is, various different things that are going on these days to try and improve care, and we think this was good nursing care 30, 40 years ago. Yet somehow, where have we lost this along the line?
Well, presumably, almost the definition of good nursing, and all my experience of nursing in the NHS has been absolutely fantastic, but it's the capacity to imagine what it's like to be the patient or the person that you're looking after, what that experience is. Is that not just something that we can expect universally as part of the profession and indeed the vocation of nursing?
Hospitals are noisy places. If you don't know where you are, if you're not aware of what the surroundings are, if you're not sure or don't know why a vehicle with two complete strangers may have come to pick you up out of a care home, out of your own home, transfer you to a big strange building, people rushing about, monitors, machines making all sorts of noises, taken to a bed, stripped, put different clothing on. It's a sense of abuse in many ways for somebody that's not aware of what's going on by complete strangers. It's a frightening environment for anybody that doesn't have the awareness to understand what is going on.
Well, that is going to be the case not just in hospitals but everywhere. If your dementia means that everything is going to be a surprise, as it were, and in somebody else's control, then you're going to be frightened and angry all the time, and that, Emily, I would imagine is very difficult on the people who are caring at home as well as in hospitals.
Yes, I mean, unpaid carers, so what we mean by that is family carers. They save our country masses and masses of money, billions of pounds in caring, the care that they give, the care they deliver to their loved ones. Now, we aren't all born carers. So it is really tough because they have to understand what dementia is, what it isn't, the type of dementia, what impact that might have, and then tailor their care around that. And that can get very stressful. And it's for organisations such as ourselves to make sure that we're providing appropriate support and education for carers of people with dementia, because they are essentially the people that keep that person independent or help to keep the person independent and keep them in the home environment for longer. Like Ian was saying, you know, moving somebody from their home environment to a hospital or to a care home, even for respite, it's really, really difficult because it creates so much anxiety with regards to the move, just to that transition from door to door. So we really need to support our carers to help them care for longer.
Well, we need to support them, but what support is there, Ian? Where can people turn to?
Again, it's quite mixed across the country. There are good organisations, there's likes of the Alzheimer's Society that have dementia advisors, support workers around the country. There are Admiral nurses from Dementia UK working within hospitals, care home settings around the country, not as many as what we would like, obviously. Then you start to struggle beyond that. It comes down to what support's available from social services, because once hospitals discharge you, their responsibility is over. Even if they're discharging somebody at 3 o'clock in the morning, putting them in a taxi or a bus to go home, is the heating on? Is the food in the place? Have they got electricity meters? You know, have things been cut off? Is that person safe in their own home? What support is there beyond that level of care? And with the limited organisations, it's difficult. It's a great struggle finding appropriate care that can fill in those gaps. You know, and we would work together in many places where we do have Admiral nurses and we do have the Alzheimer's Society. A lot of time we will overlap and do a lot of co-working together. Because that's what good care should be about and how it should look. It's not allowing those gaps to happen, because when those gaps do happen, people start falling through them, and that's when we start losing them. That's when problems start happening.
Well, it occurs to me that the demographic of the carers itself is of great relevance here, because if that vast majority of people suffering from dementia, or the vast majority of people who are going to get it in their 80s, and the chances are their children are probably in their 60s, especially the generation of people who are in their 80s now who had children younger perhaps than our generations do. So the carers themselves are ageing a bit, Emily.
Yeah, they are, and we do often see carers that have long-term health conditions caring for a person with dementia. So we know we need to better equip our carers and better equip our local infrastructure in order to be able to support carers of people with dementia and family members. I think it comes to a greater harmonisation between the health and social care sectors, the voluntary and statutory sectors. Like Ian said, in this area we have Admiral Nurses and Alzheimer's Society, and we work really well together to give more cohesive, holistic support. But in some areas that doesn't happen. So it's about, again, getting to know your clients, getting to know your carers, understanding if there's any other health conditions and how we can support them, in reach and outreach, signpost out, and make sure that they're getting all the services that they need. It's not just about Alzheimer's Society or Dementia UK. If somebody's got diabetes, they might be engaging with the local diabetic charity, doctors and nurses.
Sorry, Ian, you go ahead.
But also as well, it's about funding, again, for care services, where this gap is coming from. We hear that hospitals are overspent. What about the fact that they're actually underfunded, rather than being an overspent issue? They're underfunded to provide the level of care that is required to meet today's health problems within our society.
What would adequately funded look like in the NHS? And would we ever be allowed to keep any of our money if it were adequately funded?
They would still argue that it would be a difference between whether it's a healthcare problem or a social care problem, because the majority of people with dementia fall under the social care bracket.
But there is difficult to measure. I mean, healthcare and social care, and I know that the hospital, the NHS will always say it wants it to be a social care, and the social care will always want it to be a healthcare, because neither wants to spend its money. But both together, they will never have enough money until we're immortal, will they? Because there is no other measure of this. And so there will never be enough funding for these things if people are still dying, because that's a bad outcome for any healthcare worker.
But it's reality. That's part of life as well. We do die, but it's how well we live before we die.
Emily, you wanted to?
Really, I think, like I said earlier, it's about getting a better infrastructure. It's about how we use our resources better. We know there's no more money coming for a period of time now because of the economy and the austere times that we're living in. However, I think it is about working better together. Unfortunately, it's commissioner-led at the moment. It's a very commissioner-led climate that commissioners, and they are great, they do some great work, but commissioners look at the services they think they want in the area. And I think we need to be more user-led. We need to look at what people are telling us, where the gaps are, like Ian said, and supply services to that need as opposed to the other way around.
Emily, Ian, I have to stop you there. Thank you both so much. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Yes. Thank you.
That's all for today's Hot Topic, I'm afraid. Please join in the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. But for now, good evening.